yesterday. Starting off over on the right, we have Marcus Cross joined us again, and Suzanne Vedic, Colleen Healy, Monica Passatori, Chris McKay joins us, and Mike Marshall, of course. Eric Jenkins just came in, and Marissa Allen. So we have a good panel. We have 8 projects to look at today, and I wanted to mention that Steve Muse helped us in February, and he's unfortunately in California, so couldn't join us. But he saw all the students in February and helped get them past their sort of Part T stages. He was very, very, very helpful. He could not join us either today or yesterday. So anyway, we're going to go to Washington and see Christina's project there in the Shaw area.
Yeah. All right. Good morning, everyone. So my thesis is titled Relief in the City, a co-housing complex for stressed millennials. And before I begin, I would like to take this time to thank my thesis committee, mainly Brittany Williams, my thesis chair, Carl Dupuy, as well as Dr. Joseph Williams. And also a special thanks to Jamie Tillman and Kuman Kaliji, who were there to help me develop this thesis at its early process. So without further ado, first I will be going over the purpose of this thesis and how I tackled this issue, and then how I eventually landed on my chosen demographic, the architectural typology, and then going into depth about the site analysis and context of how I decided Shaw, DC being my final destination, and then going into the design of the project. Okay, so when I was trying to come up with a problem to tackle for my thesis, I was actually sitting in my studio desk one day feeling stressed about this upcoming deadline for a studio project. And then that's when I had a thought that what if I designed a place that could help people relieve their stress. So stress is described as somebody who is feeling weary, fatigued. They have a lot of pressure and tension and anxiety on their shoulders. And these symptoms could be caused by a variety of different circumstances. And for the sake of this thesis, these circumstances could be categorized into two things. The first is the urban environment. So I'm looking at the stress that is caused by our environmental circumstances. The first being the urban environment, where in cities there's a large population. There's lots of excessive noise that come about from public transportation, where a person who's living in, say, a New York apartment would be waking up not to the sound of birds chirping outside their window, but to the sound of sirens and honking and construction that's going around the city. And because the cities are so dense and everything's compact together, these noises are very apparent. And oftentimes these living places don't have sufficient acoustic barriers that kind of muffle that sound from outside. There's a lack of vegetation. There's like a ton of hardscape. And because there's a lack of vegetation where trees can help filter out the air, there's that leads to kind of poor air quality in cities that can be caused from pollution from like industrial areas. So maybe perhaps a person decides to stay indoors instead of outdoors. And this is seen as, there's a term for this, which is now dubbed as the indoor generation, where people are spending a majority of their life inside their homes and their workplaces. So people who are, as seen in this graph here, more than about 2/3 of Americans actually stay indoors for more than 15 hours per day. And that's a strongly high number. And that staying indoors, especially with the congested and bad air quality that's going on in cities, could be very detrimental to our health, because while you're kind of escaping from the chaos and the noises that are occurring outdoors, staying indoors and away from sunlight, which helps you determine your internal clocks for helping you sleep patterns and improving your mood, could be very detrimental in the long run. And as to why people are staying indoors all the time now leads me into my second category, which is our technology. Yes. Since we are living in the information age where information is at the tip of our fingers, people don't need to travel to the library to discover more information about this obscure topic. Instead, they can just simply open up their laptop, even open up their smartphone, and eventually see the news of the day. They would figure out what they want to know immediately, along with a bunch of different advertisements. And instead of like going out shopping, for instance, they could just simply, again, go on their laptops and just, at a click of a button, just order something online without ever having to step outdoors. So looking at these problems that are caused by the environment, both outdoors and indoors, this kind of led me into my chosen demographic, which are the millennials. Now, millennials, like any other generation, is defined by historic moments. So millennials are born from 1981 and 1996, and this is determined by the invention of the internet in 1983, and then there's the 9/11 attacks in 2001. Because the 1996 break-off year has been debated, but what determined that break-off is the, excuse me, is if people remember what happened on 9/11 and the subsequent terrorism attacks that happened afterward. And because they have been living in such an internet-saturated society, millennials become very easy to adapt to changing circumstances. They access information very fast, so that they are very up-to-date to political movements, activities, events very, very quickly. They're very engaged, and they always seek for, they are more into the collaborative aspect that's found in institutions and the workplace. So about 76% of millennials, when I was looking at stress and like what's causing their stress, they say that their workplace is the #1 cause of stress. And whether that is true or not, this is what I have found according to the Huffington Post. So this is a very prevalent problem, especially since 2016, millennials have become the largest generation group in the workforce, and that number has only increased as the younger generation, the younger millennials have finished their post-secondary schooling and are now working full-time, and that, so basically that is 76% of 56 million in U.S. labor force numbers that are believe that work is their #1 outlet for stress. And out of that 76%, about 40% are what the people call work martyrs. Now, work martyrs are people who willingly work overtime. Some people think that's, and the sad thing is that a lot of them believe that this is a positive thing, because they are contributing their assets to the company that they're working in, and they are dedicated to really helping their company and their managers, and to like really be productive members of society. And some of the reasons for why they are becoming work martyrs is, one, they could be from high expectations, it could be from their managers or themselves, and that could lead to like having no work-life balance. So they might have a lot of time into their work, but they don't go home because they don't really, to say bluntly, have a life at home, because most of these millennials are actually single. And they start families late, and they opt to stay just for convenience sake, for work's sake. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, they may put in work not because they want to like really just prove themselves to the challenge. It's because they have a sense of job insecurity, and they are afraid of losing their jobs. And then again, the technology aspect, because millennials are known to be very tech savvy, older generations at their workforce rely on them to really update them on the current trends, because they're so easy. It's easier for a millennial to adapt to using these different software programs that's happening, as opposed to people in older generation that had the internet for so long. And this could actually be seen here in the architecture building, because in architecture school here, back then people just focused on just learning how to draw, how to hand draft. But nowadays we have these different software programs like the Adobe Creative Cloud, the Microsoft Office, and you can see how it transformed this institution, and the same can be said in the workplace. So while I was coming up with these solutions on how to relieve stress and then tying that in with the work-related problems that millennials face and like how that stress came about, I looked at a study that was conducted by the Penn State University where they were looking at the relationship between stress and social isolation. And from what I gleaned from that research is that people who are socially isolated, especially if they are living in single individual households, are more likely to feel stressed because they don't really have that support system. And because even if they're living in a city that has millions of people, it doesn't necessarily mean that they know every single person there. They could just be walking down the street, not even looking at these people, and just going along their daily way. And it's hard for them, especially, to create new personal relationships because of the advent of internet and social media, where it's easier to just text somebody, to go on someone's Facebook page to get to know a person, instead of going out there and having these face-to-face interactions. And then from what I gleaned from that knowledge is that for some social solutions, we need to develop a place that encourages face-to-face interaction, to have that access to green spaces, and to create optimal group sizes so that people aren't overwhelmed into encountering new people every day too much all the time, and a chance for community growth. And by accomplishing these four solutions can lead to lower levels of stress and isolation. And so, taking all that in, this is where I ended up choosing co-housing as my architectural typology, because co-housing actually provides these opportunities for the solution that I had just described. Co-housing is a kind of community where people forego their individual space for the more public common areas. And by doing so, they encourage this face-to-face interaction for sophistication, because people have to sign up to schedule what kind of duties they want to do, like who wants to make the next meal, who wants to do the grocery shopping, and that involves face-to-face interaction as opposed to just sending an informal text. There's also time management involved because people have these shared duties. Somebody who is maybe has a deadline coming up at work could get another person to like prepare a meal for them. And then of course the engagement with green spaces that in traditional co-housing involves like a great green lawn and like a common house. And while co-housing is typically found in less dense streetscapes, the challenge of this thesis is to adapt these traditional values and putting that into a dense streetscape such as DC. Another thing that I want to say is that before determining this architectural typology, I had already went over how work was the number one stress causer, and a professor had suggested to me that maybe instead of a residential typology, maybe I should focus on making a new work office as a possibility, because that is where work is, that's where the stress is taking place. And maybe I should use like such as the WeWork spaces that have been developing and making a new stress relieving work environment. Now the answer to that is that aside from my partial bias to make a residential architecture building for my final thesis project is the aspect of the work-life balance. Because these work martyrs are already spending more than their fair share at these work offices. And sure, I could design a new work office that could help improve those circumstances, but then that means they would have no reason to go home and make those kind of personal reasons. So that's why I decided to turn to a residential typology as opposed to a commercial and work environment related one. Another thing that was discussed in depth was the idea of a community. Once I had decided on building a co-housing, is that to me, community means a group of people who have shared beliefs and motivations. And for this co-housing community that I am proposing in DC, the type of people that I'm looking at are millennials who are stressed from their work, and they are willing to accept these duties, these responsibilities that come from co-housing, and be able to establish that new work-life balance and community involvement that many of them are kind of lacking, but and so coming up with like the numbers of like the optimal community size, I have, again, using that quote, I have settled on 40 being the community size. Because another thing that I found in my research is that in the optimal group size where people could take the time to get to know everyone, to talk to them and have their opinions heard, the ideal group size would be 5 to 8, and 40 happens to be a multiple of both of those numbers. And now that we have established what kind of community and what kind of problem is persisting, now I have to pick a site that resolves those issues and really makes this thesis prove its point. And I looked at DC. DC, I looked at DC as opposed to others, is that DC is actually among the top socially isolated cities in America. The second one, I believe, was the first being Las Vegas. And then Shaw is located about 2 miles northwest of the U.S. Capitol, and then maybe just 2 blocks east of like the Logan Circle. And its population is roughly about 45,000, and taking up that little chunk, that's a very dense streetscape, because when I was looking at the Shaw, what DC neighborhoods I'm looking at, Shaw came up because of its high millennial population, as well as a chance to really make an urban impact. Because Shaw also happens to be a victim of one of the 1968 riots that was going on, where it devastated a lot of the retail and stuff. And so now it's going through an urban renewal and transformation. And I wanted my thesis project to realistically make an impact while it's there. So just some of the site parameters that I was looking at to help determine the site up, my site, my neighborhood, is the accessibility, the site conditions, and then the design potential. So looking at like maybe what kind of transportation was there, the proximity to the amenities, how flexible is that site, like how much gross area am I working with, and again, like I said, design potential, making the urban impact, and how I can integrate my program and such. So one of the things I looked at first was, of course, the access and transportation. So highlighted in red, within the 5-minute walk radius are the 2 metro stations. So that, in the south, there's the the Mount Vernon Square metro station, and up north, near the Rhode Island Avenue northwest, is the Shaw Howard University stop. That's both on the Green Line. And then looking at, I highlighted the main access roads being Rhode Island Avenue and 7th Street Northwest. These are major commuter streets, and Rhode Island connects, we call it these people who are coming from Prince George's County into the city. And 7th Street goes down and connects from Georgia Petworth Avenue from the top north. And then just some landmarks that I want to point out, and plus the amenity sites. Starting from the top is the foundation thing was the African American Civil War Museum. There's a Shaw new development actually from the Shaw Neighborhood Library that was recently made. There's the Kennedy Recreation Center down below, along with its recreational fields. And then there's the Walter E. Washington Convention Center that also houses the Mount Square area. So when I was deciding on this site, it kind of checked all the boxes that I was looking at for accessibility, site conditions, and design potential. And looking at it from an aerial view, currently the existing site is occupied by just a lot of surface parking. There was a discrepancy when I was looking at it from the aerial view that there was like some kind of Clark construction building there, but actually when I visited it and took that picture, it's now along Green Lawn, along with some kind of like a portable shelter there with the stuff. So that's basically what the site condition is along East Street Northwest. And so to go into the site context and how I'm going to integrate this program to the site, one of the reasons why I chose this site was because of its proximity to the Kennedy Recreation Center. That's like right across from East Street Northwest. So basically the Recreation Center provides a children's playground, a baseball field, tennis courts that is easily accessed. It's public access to everybody in the field. They also provide a fitness room, gymnasium, and multi-purpose rooms within their city. And if you were to look up on their website online, they also have a lot of different programs, fitness programs actually, for all age groups. And as well, and because millennials are also politically inclined, I also discovered that this place also is the site of a voting pool registration. So whenever there's elections, they would come here to like just register and vote. Another thing is Bread for the City. That's the JC building across the site, as seen in the figure ground diagram. Discovered that this building is actually an organization that helps low-income DC residents. In a way, they actually provide aid to low-income residents by giving them including medical care, social services. And this, I believe, is just another opportunity for these potential residents to be more involved in community. And then there's 7th Street Northwest. So it's like a two-way intersection. It's very long, it's like 48 feet wide, with parallel parking and bike lanes on either side. And these are the two buildings that I highlighted that are like right across the street from my site. That's the Jefferson Apartments and the Hodge. Both of them have retail on the ground floor, such as like restaurants, and like there's like PetSmart on Jefferson's apartment, and on the Hodge, it's the same thing. They are roughly at least 8 stories high on the 7th Street. But to contrast that with on the other side of Marion Street is a more pedestrian and more quiet atmosphere where it's only occupied by like 2-story row houses. And it's like a one-way street coming in from the north with, again, some parallel parking on either side. And then now that we talk about the site context, I want to go into my design goals for this project. So looking at the solutions that were proposed to me in the earlier slides is that my goal is to try to enforce face-to-face interaction, to establish these optimal groups in an ideal community size, create these thresholds between the public and private spaces, as well as give them access to vegetation, and from that vegetation that will provide quality light and air, and again, to integrate the program into the site and have it fit in. So this is my building as it stands on the site. You can see on 7th Street there's those 8-story buildings, and then as a contrast on Marion Street it's the 2-story buildings with the recreation center across from it. So what makes up the program of my building? So on the 7th Street side, because of the retail ground floor, I decided to add in some retail, commercial, and restaurants on that side, where that's what the red is. I decided to use the land use colors. What color did I say? Yellow is the residential units, taking up 3 floors. The blue are the amenity and common area spaces. And then the green is actually a solarium that I'm proposing that's taking up 2 stories. So this is the massing that I start with. It's sitting approximately on a 32,000 square foot site. I decided to really cut into that mass to create more faces to take advantage of that natural sunlight. The massing is, I began with a symmetrical mass, but then I kind of pushed that in because I was thinking about circulation and adding an addition to an underground ramp. So that required more space, as well as adding more space for the communal kitchen and dining room that's on the ground floor. And then again, the solarium, adding that in into the middle and just kind of raising it a little bit to just establish some kind of massing hierarchy. And then adding in that kind of main entry vestibule for residents to immediately know where to go to the leasing office. As you may notice, other than the DC height restriction of 130 feet, there isn't really other specified height restriction for this site because it is sitting on a mixed use zone. But I have decided to put it at roughly the building at about 15 feet as a way to act as an urban mediator between the 8-story multi-family high-rise that's on 7th Street and then the 2-story row houses that are on Marion Street. So having that a height that is between those two extremes, I feel is a way to kind of integrate the site better. So looking at P3 from the site, you'll notice that I have placed the landscaping scheme directly across from the parkscape that's offered by the Kennedy Recreation Center. I just found it interesting that placing it in a way not only utilizes that daylight, but also as a way for people who are walking down P Street to have the option of either going into the more recreational hardscape kind of activities that's going on in the Kennedy, and then the landscape scheme here that's going on. Let's zoom in there. So on the left side, there's the retail, there's the kitchen with the restaurant that's there. I added a restaurant in order to utilize that kind of southern face so that it's like more light coming in. And then on the left side of my landscaping scheme is open to the public. It's a, like more, bucolic, more resting place. And then on the other side, to kind of indicate some kind of ownership, is an outdoor balcony. No, not a balcony, a dining area that is enclosed by a 5-foot wall, actually. And then there's the straight axial circulation that enters through the building, where people can go through the vestibule. On either side, there's like waiting areas, and a new tenant could come in directly into the leasing office, or they can go into the right side where they would encounter another threshold of the waiting area and resting space before they go into the communal dining area with the subsequent kitchen there. And this is just a perspective view of the communal dining area. And you can see that, like, from the seating area, they can see what's happening outside on the street. And there's like doors accessing the outdoor dining area that's by the 5-foot wall. So how would they get up from the ground floor? Is there's 2 circulation cores. So above that, these are the residential units I want to get into. So for clarity's sake, I'm going to label that this left wing as house 1, and then the right wing that's facing Marion Street as house 2, just for the sake of clarification. As you can see in my little part T, and this house 1 and house 2 is connected by the common area in the middle. One thing that one of my goals, as I said previously, is to enforce face-to-face interaction. And a way of doing that is basically strategically placing the circulation cores right before the common area spaces. Because all too often, from my own experience and others, when you're living in an apartment, people who want to be alone would just simply go up the access stair, a fire stair or so, in an elevator, and then never having to meet anybody because the circulation is often placed in an obscure corner of the building, and they can just go there and then just access their unit without meeting anyone. But in this building, the circulation actually opens up directly into the common area where a lot of people are actually working, preparing meals and each other. And in each of these common area spaces, while there is a large communal kitchen and dining on the ground floor, that's where everyone is supposed to meet, the 40 people that I'm posting it to, it's also important to establish those optimal group sizes of 5 to 8 people. So in house 1, there are 4 units, and on the other side, there are 6 units. And the square footage that I've given for the lounge and the kitchenette that's there is proportional to the number of tenants on either side. A little bit more on the types of unit types I'm proposing. So I decided to go with an established kit of parts, particularly for the storage and bathrooms. So every unit has an 8x8 bathroom and an 8x4 closet, and then the bedroom and living space would differ depending on what kind of unit they have. And something key thing to note is the kitchen appliances. Because residents already have a little kitchen outside the building, I'm only giving each of them a small fridge, a microwave, a sink, a toaster, and a cabinet within each of their units. So if they want to store food way later and be able to pick it up, then they will be able to do that in their own units, as opposed to just putting all of their stuff in the fridge. But then for major appliances like dishwashers, freezers, ovens, and stoves, those are all out in the communal area. So that kind of forces people to not always linger in their units, but to also go out and engage with others while they're preparing meals. Again, this is the typical one-bedroom unit. So starting from the one-bedroom unit, there's the addition of a balcony that they can go in as, and then as well as the two-bedroom. So there's the bedroom spaces, and again, the same amount of kitchen appliances apply. So now that we know the units, one thing that's different about this co-housing unit is, as opposed to maybe apartment unit, is that while I call them units, the reason why I term them as a house one and a house two is that I see these units as rooms. Because really they are sharing that kitchenette and the public lounge that's there. So it's almost like an extension of their own room. So that despite the small square footages that are offered in the unit, it wouldn't feel that way because they would realistically be spending more time out there. And that leads me into the common area that's placed in the middle of these residential wings. So on the first floor, I have rooms that are given for people who want to watch TV. There are walls enclosing that to act as an acoustic barrier from what's happening on the TV screen to people who are sitting and resting in the common area that's facing the curtain glass window. So a picture of that, there's some people that are there, and then there's some kind of little workstations on the side, and then from outside is the balcony where people could just sit there, relax, they can engage with people that are coming in from the front, as well as the people that are in the outdoor dining area, as well as people going around the street. Now, going up the next 2 floors, again, the residential unit layout is the same, but the program has changed in the common area sector. So instead of a large public lounge, I have the addition of a solarium. And the solarium is break up into the public and private areas, as well as areas of rentals. So in the center place is using the columns as a guideline to really segregate the different activities. In the middle are the more public gathering spaces where people could meet in a conference style and really be engaged with the nature that's around them. Because there's the tendency of staying indoors all the time. If people want to stay indoors, they might as well at least bring the nature in so they could still benefit from looking at the greenery that can help uplift their mental fatigue and such. And people will be going up to the stairs on the top, on the side, and as you can see that in the section here, where the sunlight is coming in and it's hitting the overhangs that are in there, so that the light won't filter throughout the space. And then below that is the common area space as well. This is just a perspective view of the solarium, but people could interact with people from above and below. And then there's that large window is actually a little heat room into the communal public lounge that's in house 2. People could just easily access it there. And the types of plants that are there is pretty easy to manage because again I had to take into account that the people that I'm proposing this community to are possibly work mothers and they'd be staying in their workplace for a long time. So just adding plants that are more low maintenance and doesn't require as much time and energy. It's just putting those there. That's our consideration. Again, this is the low mezzanine that's connecting the units on the 3rd floor. And then just a little bit on the roof plan. So from here, for graphic reasons, it's kind of blocked out as these green spaces. There's pergolas where people could go under and hang out. So just a view of that. This is a rooftop deck that's overlooking 7th Street on House 1. So people could sit in these little tables under the pergola. There's benches lined up with plant boxes. And the green spaces are actually indicating the plant boxes that are there because, again, I don't want it to have this extensive kind of roof garden where it requires a ton of maintenance and energy. So it's just having plant boxes there. And then, again, just having another rooftop deck on House 2 overlooking the little landscape screen I have, and there's like a way of interacting on either end. So to conclude, this proposed program is for millennials who are seeking a work-life balance. They are being willing to accept the duties that come from living in a co-housing environment, and from that, I hope that they would benefit from having their stress relieved and being able to become part of the community and develop new social relationships. So I would like to open the floor for more questions and discussion from the critics.
Is it on?
Yep.
Is it on?
Yes.
Well, I guess I'm starting. I'd like to commend you on a very thoughtful thesis topic. Thinking about a particular population. And I'm curious, had you thought about how you would approach who comes, who wants to live? I could see there would be a tremendous demand. And you have how many units?
There are a total of 30 units.
30 units, and 40 is kind of the top.
Yes, ideally 40 would be the number, but perhaps realistically, as you said, there will be high demand because it is located near the DC capital, and that is a very ideal place to live and work. So using the ideal versus realistic, while ideally I would like to have 40 people, the number realistically would go up, especially if in the case of one-bedroom apartments, there might be like a couple sharing a bedroom. There could be like a roommate situation where they like share the rent and in the two-bedroom apartments. And so at the camp.
Quick comment on the common areas and the kitchens. I could see a scenario where the kitchen is much more celebrated in the space. In terms of like bringing maybe house one or house two, bringing all of those folks together. You really want to be able to accommodate a group of like 5 or 6 people who are cooking together.
Right.
So I could see the kitchens in these two areas being much more celebrated, perhaps more dining spaces out here, or I could even see the possibility of using the solarium as a kind of celebration of the group cooking activities.
Right.
I think that's, one of the things that brings everyone together, sharing meals. So that's one comment I have on the kind of how you've populated and furnished and thought about the common areas.
Is that there isn't enough affordable housing in the city, and co-housing is one of the solutions, and I think you're asking the right questions. And that affordable housing is a big problem in the city, and the land is expensive, and just for a millennium to rent an apartment by himself, it's too expensive. So sharing, saying that we share not everything, we share work space, we share a car, we share housing, that's something new, and it can work really well. The other thing that I wanted to add, so the solution of co-housing is really important in the city. I like that in your solution, I like to give the tenants the flexibility that if they want to be alone, they can be alone, and if they want to be in a community with friends, that they can be in the public spaces. So they have these two options, so that's a really good way to live. Another thing is that I have a hard time with the relaxation that they will stay inside because millennials are on their computers and their phone and they like to stay inside.
Right.
What gives balance is the connection between the inside and the outside and exposing them more to nature and to the site. And you are providing some outdoor spaces, but I would I would develop it even more than that. Give them much more connection with the outside. Then,
So stress, one of the biggest de-stressors that we have as a person, as a people, is physical activity.
Right.
And so I'm a little disappointed that there's not anything involving exercise in this space. Maybe it's something as a running loop, not just a gym, not just a set aside room, but a bigger thought about how people can engage with physical activity. And also the idea of a solarium, I think, is a really lovely idea. But gardening is also a major de-stressor for people, and I think they often don't have the space to express that. And so the solarium has the potential of being an extra thing to work on, but it's a fun hobby work. It's a thing that you love to do. So I think that's something that should really be developed a lot more and celebrated a lot more. It's something I think that in general, I think you've taken a little bit of a staid approach to the site that is realistic. Maybe there's retail and dining on the first floor, and then residents come up, and there's a solarium, but it's only for the people who live here. And in my mind, this should be really about pushing those boundaries of how you can engage in a community and make a community that is inward, but is also outward and expressive. So I would bring that solarium down to all the way down, make it your central piece, make it your focus, let the community come in and be a part of it. I think there needs to be more celebration about the activities of what a community can be and engaging how communities can be.
Right, you brought up a lot of good points, and good questions as well. I definitely have for consideration on. But to answer your question about like why there is no running track, there's no rooms of having an exercise room or fitness room, is because, as I've highlighted in the Kennedy Recreation Center, it has public access, and I might as well make use of the surrounding programs as a way for people who are living here to utilize that building there, to use their fitness rooms, to use their gymnasium that's inside, and then there's the outdoor exercise rooms, which is why I thought that maybe adding another own exercise room in this building makes it a little redundant, because again, you want to have that connection with the overall community and not just grow inwards. So I think that just leaving all the outdoor physical activity to what's happening in the Kennedy Recreation Center is my way of trying to integrate that community with the...
Yeah, to clarify, I don't mean to like put an exercise room in here,
right,
but just as an understanding of exercise as a de-stressor. And maybe it's just part of presentation that's maybe more clear. Maybe I just missed it and that was part of it.
Okay.
The only other thing I'd say is you've got the mix between 8-story and 2-story. Question is, did you consider varying your height across the site to play with the volumes a little bit more, or was 4 stories just the median between? I'm just curious.
To answer that question, in the beginning there was one part 2 where I had house 1 have an extra floor to make it higher as opposed to what's happening in house 2, to really relate that and bring it home about the different urban fabric that's going on these streets. One of the reasons why I kept it kind of pretty even and proportional is again the number of units. Because sure, I can add another unit, another floor of units here, but that will definitely exceed the ideal number of the optimal 40 people that I'm looking at. Although realistically, maybe that number might go higher in terms of like roommates and couples, but that's kind of the reason why I kept that just to keep that number of the 30 units with the housing at 40 people. That's so 30. Yeah.
So I think you've done a fine building, and I want to start there. So
Okay.
Nice graphics. I think you've done a fine building.
Thank you.
I wrestled with your presentation. So your presentation, as one who falls into the upper end of the millennial spread, you had me really psyched. And so you're talking about work stress and all these things, and then, I'm thinking this whole time as you're talking about that stuff, I'm looking here, I'm like, why are we looking at housing? And then you answer that, like midway through. and I get it, your thesis, you want to do what you want to do, but just rebrand how you're like selling this stuff.
Okay.
Like just say, I want to do housing, I want to do housing in a different way. To lead us on this whole thing about how millennials work and how millennials are stressed out, work martyrs and all this, and then get to where you want it to be. It just seemed a little disjointed. And even with that, the build-up of how work happens, I don't see very many solutions you've spoken to. You know, millennials not only work a lot at work, they also bring their work home. And it's not really clear how that gets incorporated into your plans in a thoughtful way. So, again, if you want to do housing, great, do housing. The second thing, as I look at, and I agree with the comments about the solarium and the community space, the thing that jumps out to me is I have friends who've done co-housing, and for a thesis project, it's been hit to wax about rent. Like, I have friends who do co-housing, they do it in Columbia Heights just north of their site. They're doing it because they can't afford to be on their own. Like, they do it for communal reasons also, but the finance is a whole part of it. So for a thesis project, I would like to see, and maybe you've done this and you haven't presented it to us, is there any analysis on how much would rent be for one of these? Like, are you designing a building that's essentially going to be a luxury thing that, you know, only, because there's so much communal space and all that costs money and real dollars for development. And so, like, is that something that, you know, a very elite few are going to be in, or is it going to be more of an affordable housing type approach to the solution? I wish you had taken
subsidized or not.
I'm sorry?
Subsidized or not.
Yes, and I just wish you would have taken a more forceful stance on that and said, yes, it's going to be luxury and they're going to have bells and whistles and concierge service, or no, it's going to be subsidized and it's going to have these great amenities. The other thing that I think of, and I'll stop talking shortly, but your main communal space on the ground floor, so two things. Number one, you have this restaurant. So I think another thing you hit on, you know, millennials, cooking is a great thing. Also going out like after a long day of work, you want someone to cook for you. So you like accommodate an outdoor space. If you cook your own meal, then the restaurant doesn't really seem to have any outdoor space in its own outdoor seating. And then the main approach into the building, you've got all the square footage dedicated to this communal area off to the side. But essentially, like your entry approach, you have the leasing office right in front. I personally would have just opened the door and you're in the main living room of this entire complex. That's been the life of the party. That's where people are hanging out. That might be where there's a quiet room off the side to do some work or whatever. And then on the solarium as well, like I think at one point you said you did a nod to it by slightly raising the height up a little bit. Like you should have done a much bigger nod. Like, and I think 2 stories is a bit stingy for it. Like I would have done it 3 stories, like had it open onto a terrace. Another thing I think about, you know, if you're not going to have the true outdoor experience, the other cool thing about the typology, too, I forget which side where the row houses are, in DC is like a lot of people after work, they live in these group houses, they're kind of conjoined. They just sit on the porch and just relax. And so it's not like there's something going on, but like I know you have balconies that are accessed from the units. It would have been nice if there had been more like group, you know, terraces like the solarium could have opened up to a terrace, if the building could have stepped back. And I think just being to the height differential, that could have solved some of the massing challenges you had. Is if the building had a little bit more height differential, you had more outdoor terraces at different levels for communal outdoor gathering.
You know, the urban design and the height, to me, is a little bit of an issue because I think 7th Street, O Street Market has some big buildings on it, right, across the street.
Yes.
And I wonder if you know, by the way, very nice presentation, very well presented, compliments, very thorough, so very nice. But it makes me wonder whether the bigger piece ought to be on 7th and be taller. And I know 40 units was sort of your issue there. I don't know that architects get to decide programs sometimes like that. Sometimes those things are decided by other things. And it seems to me that if you had a few more units and you had a little more retail space, you could lower the stress by lowering the rents. You know, and I think that would be maybe a good thing. And it makes me wonder whether, should you really have this ground level courtyard? If that was up a floor, you could fill that in with revenue producing retail. And then you could have, the solarium could have kind of a walkout space. I might lower a floor so the solarium space and a raised courtyard have some relationship to one another. And I don't think it would be a problem, it certainly would be a problem for me to have a more dense building up on 7th Street that was taller. You'd have to add a fire stair, no big deal there, you know how to do that. But it would give me a little bit more units, so more revenue, rents would go down, less stress, right? Because, you know, let's face it, that's one of the things. And I think then the courtyard would be more of the environment for the people living in the building and could potentially have a more resident relationship with the solarium space inside, which I think could, you know, there could be some very nice kind of indoor-outdoor relationships there that people have been talking about. I think in reality, you know, you have recognized that there is a difference from one side to the other. I mean, the smaller piece over by the row houses makes some sense. But I think the 7th Street thing really could be a lot bigger. And, you know, what's the difference between 40 and say 60 units? Is that going to crash the program somehow? And all of a sudden millennials will be marching in the streets about how horrible it is to live in co-housing with all these other people? I'm not sure about that, actually. And I think what it really needs is it needs that environment that's theirs. And by pushing the courtyard up a level, I think you could define it more that way.
It would also allow you to bring in subsidized or, you know, kind of the mixed income housing component if you had more units. And to Matt's point, the reality is the developer would probably push for you to maximize
Use the microphone because really.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, use the microphone.
Well, then Eric just whispered something about the lobby. You could come in through your ground. You could come in through your ground level piece there.
That valley is an exception.
And have a lobby, and they could go right upstairs to the courtyard, which I think would be a nice experience. And maybe even there's some openings in the floor that allow you to see that. But I think that would be one way to kind of, and you know, with the commercial mixed-use zoning, you could do 100% lot coverage on the first floor. It's not a big deal. You can cover the whole thing if it's commercial uses. So it wouldn't even be a zoning problem.
I think someone's been waiting here.
Well, unfortunately, I agree with Matt on
Fortunately for you.
But yeah, I mean, the ground floor retail there, I mean, this street is the lot coverage here. You have so much property value in this area right now. And to give that over to this little courtyard in the front, which has a walled garden that no one's going to use because they're all going to be up in one of the other 2 kitchens that you've given them upstairs. So I think making all of that ground floor retail makes complete sense. And you really had some compelling images of the solarium, and so you could imagine those going 3 stories, connecting all those different levels, having some places where it's covered on the 2nd floor, and then there's a spot on the 3rd floor. So you're getting these different levels of intimacy, which will allow people to feel comfortable going and occupying those spaces, but still feel like they're glimpsing other people, and maybe they're having these chance interactions, which is, I think, what you're looking for. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the facade and how you approached. Right now, it seems that the facade in House 1 and House 2 are very similar. And we've already talked about the height differences, but obviously the treatment is also something that can help relate to the streetscape on either side. Marion is a very, very slow scale, residential, tree-lined, you know, pedestrian street, and 7th is very different. So I'd love to hear, I don't think we ever see that elevation in any of the images of what it really looks like from Marion. Yeah, we don't see like kind of the back elevation or, so anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think the simple answer is time. Just like for the elevation. But I think I was more concerned about like the openings and like adding those bay windows and touch openings more so than like how what the material is being used. Because currently the base is a stone base, and then there's like stuccally laid over the concrete slab construction, and then using those aluminum panels to like emphasize those bay windows on the border units. That's basically the language that's happening around the building, other than like again the solarium and its overhangs. So like that central mass has been too big. But I think if I were to develop this thesis further, perhaps I could make the house too having a different, maybe perhaps a brick facade to like really match the dialogue that's happening on Korea Street. But at the moment, I think the reason why I kept it uniform is this just to show some kind of equity treatment that's going on in-house on the house too. So I think that's my reason for that. I know that.
So, did you consider at all the block behind you? Because it strikes me that you have this building that's facing outward, and yes, to the side streets, but a lot of activity happens on the inside of blocks. Now, I'm coming from Baltimore, maybe things may be a little bit slightly different, but most of it, there is so much activity that happens on the inside of the block, and I've been enough around DC to know that there's a lot of activity that happens on the inside that I think it's unfortunate that this is such a one-sided building, and it has a back, and it's the alley, and that's it. We have people that are building little garage cottages, workshops, etc. in their space, and these are all residences here, yes? Back there? Not on this side. But it seems to me that you can also promote community by considering what's happening on the inside. There's day-to-day interactions where people are coming and going. When I visit friends here, we come in and out of their back alley. We don't go to their front door. Even where I live, my house doesn't have an alley. I don't use the front door, I come in and out the back. So did you consider that at all? Whoa, hey, thanks, Brian. Oh, and we have to wrap up, I'm sorry, but I'd just be curious if you considered at all the alley.
There was an early scheme of having this ground floor elevated to have this walkway kind of line up with this street there. But then I treated it as an alley because, again, these are houses along with the retail that's facing 7th Street. These are the backs of houses. And with that comes like a whole other set of problems, like about who gets to access this space. Because at the time, I think I had developed this kind of courtyard scheme. And then people who are going in from this main entry vestibule might not necessarily want to see the back of that house, that street there. I think I closed that off for sake of visibility, aesthetics, and of course, like some kind of lighting.
There are some wonderful examples of city blocks that are There are some wonderful examples of city blocks that have turned their ugly back alleys into their gardens, into their most communal space, and you can tie not just these 40 units to themselves, but you can tie them to a bigger community. So I think it's something worth exploring as you kind of think about community.
We have to.
So I just want to congratulate Christina on her persistent pursuit of this thesis. It's come a long way, so congratulations. And then I want to thank you for bringing this topic and allowing us to have a conversation about this innovative housing type and how it can adapt to the urban environment, and then also the conversation about millennials and how that generation might be having an impact on space and form. So thank you and congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
We're going to go to the next venue across